In South China, there is this 100-kilometer long wilderness trail called the Mleho Trail. And at first glance, it just seems like a pretty normal, beautiful hiking trail, until you begin to research what other hikers have said about what they experienced out on that trail. Let's just say some of their experiences are genuinely terrifying. And today, I'm going to tell you one of those experiences. It's about this man who goes solo hiking out on the Mleho Trail, and he comes in contact with something that neither he nor anybody else can explain. But before we get into that story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place, because that's all we do, and we upload once a week. So if that's of interest to you, please offer to mail the like button's very important, time-sensitive job applications for them. But instead of mailing them, just immediately put them in the trash. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into today's story. On the morning of June 18th, 2016, a 45-year-old hiker named Jang stood at the entrance to the famous Mleho's Wilderness Trail in southern China. He reached into his backpack, pulled out his phone, aimed it at the trail, and took a photo. Now, this trail was very beautiful, which is why he was taking a photo of it, but it also had a reputation for being a very dangerous trail. It was located in an area called the Saikung Peninsula, and the trail itself was about 100 kilometers long, or 62 miles. And it went through forests and mountains and streams, and the weather along this trail was very unpredictable, with sudden storms rolling in and just wreaking havoc. But Zhang was feeling very confident about this hike because he himself was an experienced hiker. While he maybe hadn't done this particular trail, he had hiked similar trails, and also the weather appeared to be holding up. However, before Zhang could even take a step onto this trail, the sky suddenly turned this dark greenish hue, and there was a loud thunderclap. I mean, basically instantly, there was this massive storm overhead. Zhang couldn't believe it. He just stood there watching as this unbelievable storm rolled in, wondering what he should do. I mean, again, he had not prepared for a storm. It was supposed to be nice out. But as he's kind of weighing whether or not he should just turn around and head back home because it was now too dangerous, the sky, just as suddenly as this all began, cleared. And it was suddenly beautiful and bright out, and the storm was gone. Now, at first, Zhang was not entirely convinced that the storm was now just magically gone. And so for a few minutes, he just stood there waiting in case it came back. But it didn't. The sky remained beautiful and clear. And so eventually, Zhang posted that photo he had taken of the trail, and he captioned it with something to the effect of, very strange weather out here, but I'm continuing my hike. And then after posting the photo, he put his phone away and began walking down the Mleho's trail. At first, as Zhang headed off into the forest, he made good time. It was warm out, but not too hot, and his pack was fairly light. And also, the views were just stunning. Every time he came to a rise on the trail, he could look out and see the waves of the South China Sea, and the air was so clear and crisp. I mean, it was a really relaxing and beautiful place to be. Certainly a big change from what he was used to, which was the noise and crowds of the city. And so Zhang just continued on his hike, stopping periodically to take more photos. But after about an hour of this hike, when things were still going really well, Zhang reached this fairly steep incline on the trail, and he began walking up it. There had been past inclines on the trail, and he had been fine. But as he began maneuvering up this particular incline, he began to feel kind of woozy. In fact, more specifically, he began to feel like the air all around him was getting really hot, like somebody was turning up the temperature all around him. And so Zhang, he stopped as he was making his way up this incline to kind of catch his breath. But as he did that, the heat just got worse and worse. He became delirious. And as he was almost towards the top of this hill, it was like he just couldn't go any further. And the world began to spin all around him. And before long, he was tumbling to the ground and blacking out. The next thing Zhang became aware of was the feeling of grass pressed up against his cheek. He was laying on the trail. So he kind of opened his eyes, he sat up for a second, he was very disoriented. He didn't know how long he had been out for. He figured it was only a couple of minutes. But as he kind of got his bearings, the first thing he noticed is the sky was now totally dark. And when he had passed out, it was broad daylight. And so he's thinking, that can't possibly be true. I can't have been here for hours. That's not possible. And so he began to think to himself like, oh, I guess another storm has rolled in. That's why the sky is so dark. It's not nighttime. But then when he reached into his bag and pulled out his phone and saw the time and saw it was 8 o'clock at night, he realized there was no storm. It really is nighttime. He had been unconscious on this trail for apparently like 12 hours. And so as Zhang just stared at his phone in disbelief, his phone began to ring, and it was his wife. And so Zhang's thinking, oh my goodness, I'm supposed to be home right now. My wife is definitely worried about me. And so pretty quickly he kind of composed himself, even though again, he has no idea what's happening here. And he answers the call, and as cheerful as he could, he told his wife that everything was fine, he was just running late and he would be home soon. And so she said, okay. And then after Zhang hung up with her, he put his phone back in his backpack and pulled out a flashlight. And then he stood up and kind of checked himself over for cuts and scrapes and bruises. You know, he had no idea what condition he was in here. But after checking himself over, he seemed okay. I mean, he was still very disoriented and confused, but physically he was okay. And then again, even though he doesn't understand what's happening here, he's just thinking, okay, I gotta turn around, get back to the car, and get home as quickly as possible. So he slung his backpack, and with his flashlight out in front of him, he just started hoofing it back down the trail in the direction of his car. Now, as Zhang walked along, he was feeling very unsettled, but he kept telling himself that, independent of whatever's happened here, he was gonna be home soon, and everything was gonna be fine. However, not long into his return trip towards his car, he began to get this unbelievably bad feeling, like something was just totally wrong here. And as he began having this feeling, he suddenly took stock of the fact that the forest he was in, which had been so alive with life and sound and everything, was now completely silent. No insects, no animals. The stream nearby was making no sound. It was like he was in a void. And it was so eerie. And he stopped and just listened, and it was like the whole world was on mute. And so Zhang, who now is starting to feel scared, just began scanning his flashlight all around him, not even sure what he was looking for. But as he did, he had another realization. Suddenly the area he was in did not look familiar at all. I mean, he had only walked maybe several paces away from where he had just fallen to the trail and passed out. But now as he looked around, it was like he was in a totally different section of the forest. I mean, he looked back where he had fallen, and even in the grass where he would have been, it was untouched. There was no impression on the ground from where he would have been laying for 12 hours, like he'd been transported somewhere else without knowing it. Now, when Zhang spoke to his wife on the phone, he was very careful not to alarm her, even though he had sort of a growing sense of panic inside of him. But now, the whole situation was sort of out of hand. He really didn't understand what was happening, and he knew he needed help. And so he reached into his backpack to pull out his phone to call for help, except when he reached into his bag, there was nothing there. His phone was gone, his supplies were gone, the bag was totally empty, even though literally minutes before it had been full. Like there was no way he just randomly lost this stuff. It had been there, and now it was gone. And so Zhang desperately looked on the ground with his flashlight, and he walked back in the direction where he believed he had fallen, even though it didn't look like the same place. He's looking all over the place like, maybe he did drop his stuff, but he didn't. It was just gone. And so now, really feeling scared, Zhang just completely lost his composure and began screaming at the top of his lungs for help. But he heard nothing in response, just silence. And then not long after that, Zhang's head began to feel heavy again, and then he sank to the ground, put his head in the dirt, and he closed his eyes. Hey guys, I have an incredible announcement. Something I know is going to absolutely make your day, something many of you may have waited years for me to say again. Beginning the first full week in the new year, so the week of January 5th, I am going to go from one measly upload on this channel a week to 2, 3, even 4 uploads a week. You heard that right, we're going back to 2, 3, even 4 times a week. You guys have been telling me that you want me to release more videos, and well, I and our whole team have been listening. So as always, make sure your notifications are on so you don't miss any of these amazing extra weekly uploads. It will not replace what you're already getting. This is all in addition to. It's going to be great. See you guys soon. When Zhang woke up, it was bright out, and he also was now magically back at the original spot where he had passed out on that steep incline. And the first thing he did as soon as he came to is he reached into his bag, hoping that his phone and other supplies would have just materialized by now. But no, when he reached inside the bag, it was still empty. And so on the one hand, Zhang still is like, what is going on here? I don't understand what's happening. And then on the other, he was also becoming acutely aware that because he doesn't have his phone, he can't call for help. Like, he's stuck out here. And so he's wondering, like, what is he gonna do here? And then it dawns on him that, it's been at least several hours since he last spoke to his wife, and she was expecting him home the night before. And so by now, certainly, because he hasn't come home, she must have called the police. And so maybe there was already a search party out here looking for him. And so suddenly feeling kind of hopeful that that was actually happening, Zhang, despite his confusion and disorientation here, just scooped up his backpack, put it on, and began walking down the trail back in the direction towards his car. And as he walked, Zhang periodically would call out, hoping that again, some searchers or other hikers were nearby who would hear him and come to his aid. But after hiking for over an hour, he still had not reached his car. The forest was still eerily silent, like everything was silent. He hadn't seen or heard anybody else. I mean, he's totally alone here. And so Zhang started to wonder if maybe his best bet was not to try to hike out of here, but instead to just stay put and wait for, hopefully, the search party, if there was one out there, to come find him, or maybe some other hiker to come find him. However, as he was considering this, he looked up ahead where the trail kind of turned, and he saw there was this pond, a pond he had not seen on the way in, but nonetheless, there was a pond basically right over there. And from his perspective, he could see kind of through the trees on the other side of the pond appeared to be a person. Zhang suddenly felt this enormous sense of relief. Here was the person who was going to help him and get him out of here. And so Zhang began walking towards this person, and as he did, he cupped his hands and he called out a hello to get this person's attention. Now, when Zhang did this, he believed this person would either, one, hear him, turn around and see what Zhang wanted, or two, they wouldn't hear him, and they would just continue to stand there with their back to him. But neither of those things happened. When Zhang called out this very hearty hello, this person just instantly began sprinting away from Zhang without even turning to look at him. They just began taking off into the trees. And Zhang, he's thinking like this is a crisis for him. He has no idea what's happening here. This is the first person he's seen. He needs them. And so instinctively, Zhang just took off running after them, calling out the whole time, trying to reassure them that he was not a threat. He didn't mean to scare them. He needs their help. And so he gets to the pond. He runs around the perimeter. He can still see this person running off into the woods. And Zhang, like he's so exhausted from the lack of water and food, he's not feeling his best, but somehow through adrenaline alone, he starts gaining on this person. And eventually he closes the distance on this person as they're weaving through the trees. And suddenly this person just stops. And they don't turn around to look at Zhang, they just stop in the middle of the woods. And Zhang, he almost barrels into them because he had been running so quickly, and he just stops. And he's staring at the back of this person who still has not turned around to look at him at any point. And Zhang says to them, please, I need your help. And Zhang, he's panting, he's totally out of breath. And this person who's been running at top speed the whole time, they're not out of breath. They're not even moving. They're stationary, just with their back to Zhang. And suddenly, as Zhang is staring at this person, realizing that something feels off here, the person begins to turn around to look at him. And as they do, Zhang suddenly feels this incredible sense of dread. Like he chased this person down, he needs their help, but now that they're turning around to face him, something feels wrong and he doesn't want to see him. Something's off here. And then the person fully turns around and looks at Zhang. And Zhang is suddenly so terrified of what he sees, he holds his breath and just stays there frozen to the spot staring. He can't believe what he's looking at. This was not a person. This was some sort of shadowy figure with no face, and it was now staring directly at Zhang. And Zhang, again, he's so scared he can't move, he's holding his breath, he's just looking right back at them, and then suddenly this figure takes an aggressive step toward Zhang, and then another, and another, until suddenly they're inches away from Zhang, and Zhang is so terrified, he just closes his eyes, expecting to die at any second, and then when he opens his eyes, the figure's just gone. For about 5 minutes, Zhang just stood there, shaking in utter disbelief of what he had just experienced. I mean, this whole thing had been terrifying, but this specific interaction with this shadow figure was horrifying, and he had no idea how to process it. But at the same time, after a few minutes, Zhang's thinking to himself, I don't want to stay around here to try to figure out what's going on. I need to get out of here. And so Zhang finally, after mustering the courage, he turns to start walking back towards the pond and back up to the trail. But when he turns around, the pond isn't there anymore. It's just this endless expanse of trees. The pond should have been right there, and it's gone. And also, when Zhang took off running after this shadow figure, it was daylight. And now, it's darkness. It's total darkness. And so once again, Zhang has somehow gone to a new location and jumped through time, several hours at least, with no idea how that had even happened. And also, as he's having this realization that once again, it's like space-time has changed all around him, he starts to have that heaviness in his head, things start to swim all around him, and before long, he's fallen to the ground and he's closing his eyes. When Zhang woke up again, it was now suddenly bright out. So again, more time has passed. He was not just passed out for a minute or two, it was several hours at least. And also, Zhang was now magically laying right next to the pond that had vanished the night before after this figure had showed up. And so at this point, Zhang is seriously thinking to himself that he must have lost his mind. That's what's happening here. He's gone insane. Or does he have some horrible head injury that's like causing hallucinations or something? Like, he doesn't know. But at the same time, all he can do at this point is just get up, try to get back to the trail, and try to get back to his car and get back home. That's all he can do. And so that's what he did. Zhang made his way back up to the trail and began walking down the trail in the direction that he believed was back towards his car. But after hiking for a while, things did not look any more familiar. It was like he was hiking down a brand new trail that he had never been on before. The forest continued to be eerily silent, and every time he called out for help, he got nothing in response. And then eventually, Zhang reached a section of the trail that kind of sloped down, and when he got there and he looked out ahead of him, he saw down below there was this huge cemetery. Now, Zhang had studied this entire area before coming out on this hike, and he knew there was no cemetery in the middle of the Mleho's trail. Like, this can't be here. But remember, by this point, Zhang has seen and experienced things that he cannot understand. So he doesn't even know what's real and what's not anymore. And so as he's looking at the cemetery, he told himself, this has got to be some hallucination. This can't be here. But after walking down the hill and entering the cemetery, he reached out and touched the headstones, and they were very real. This cemetery absolutely, for right now anyways, was real and right in front of him. And as he looked at the dates on these headstones, he could tell the cemetery was at least 200 years old. And so as Zhang is taking in this new information, he looks up and he sees a couple hundred meters away from him is a group of what appears to be people clustered around a grave. And for a moment, Zhang feels this unbelievable sense of relief. Here we go, there's some people here. You know, they're visiting their relatives. They can help me. But before Zhang ran over there and asked for their help, he watched one of them sort of turn their bodies and they looked back at Zhang. And instantly Zhang's body was overcome with terror once again. Because this person was not a person. This was a faceless, dark figure, just like the one he had encountered near the pond. And there was this horrible sense that this thing was looking right at him. And so horrified, Zhang just turned and ran away. That night, Zhang found himself inexplicably back at that small pond. Didn't even know how he got there, but at this point, he wasn't questioning anything, because he didn't understand any of this. And as he was next to this pond, at some point, he had that heaviness come over him, and before long, he was on the ground, closing his eyes. However, this time, as he sort of slept or became unconscious, he entered into this sort of dream state, where he became aware that there were whispers all around him. Somebody or something was trying to communicate with him, and at first he couldn't tell what it was. But then he realized it was like the earth was talking to him. It was like the rocks and the nearby water were literally speaking to him. And for some reason, this felt sort of comforting, even though again, he has no idea what to make of this. And then when Zhang woke up again, it was bright out, and all of a sudden Zhang was aware that the forest was alive again. There were sounds coming from everywhere, animals, insects, there was water sounds. It was like things were back to normal. And Zhang, he also had this incredible clear-headedness that he hadn't had for the past several days. It really was like things had gone back to normal. And so Zhang stood up and he heard the sound of running water nearby, and he followed it to a stream. And so he decided he would just follow this stream right on out of the Mleho's trail. Like, this was going to be the way he would get out of here. But after walking for hours and hours along the stream, he still had not found his way out. The sun was now directly overhead, beaming down on him. He was so hot, he was tired, he was moving slower and slower. His optimism was beginning to fade. And then he looked up, and just up ahead, he saw something that destroyed any of the optimism he had left. Because right up ahead were 3 more shadow figures with their back to him. It was like they were blocking his way towards freedom. And so as Zhang tensed up and prepared to turn and run back deeper into this trail that he was trying to escape, one of these shadow figures turned and they looked directly at Zhang. And when they did, everything changed. Because Zhang instantly realized this was no shadow figure. This was a real person. They had a face, and they were calling out to him saying, "Hey, do you need any help?" And Zhang was so relieved, so happy. He couldn't even say anything back. He just fell to his knees and wept tears of joy. He was finally saved. It would turn out Zhang's wife had called the police on that first night when Zhang didn't come home. And so the whole time Zhang was out in the woods over these several days, there was actually a massive search party out there looking for him. However, none of the searchers claimed to have seen or heard Zhang at any point, and Zhang did not see or hear any of the searchers. Those people at the end who finally rescued him were just random hikers that happened to see him. But somehow, despite the fact that Zhang really could not have gone very far from his car, I mean, he really didn't cover a huge distance on this trail when this whole experience began, despite that, the searchers never heard or saw Zhang at any point, and Zhang obviously never heard or saw any of them. So they're basically in the exact same area, looking for each other, but nobody sees each other. After being discovered by those 3 real people on Mleho's trail, Zhang was taken to a hospital where he was examined, and it was determined there was nothing physically wrong with him other than he had not had much to eat or drink in several days. In fact, the official explanation for what happened to Zhang was just that he was really dehydrated. However, Zhang didn't buy that explanation. And when Zhang left the hospital and got back home, he immediately began digging into the history of the Mleho's trail, and he would quickly discover that he was not the first person to have a totally wild, bizarre, borderline paranormal experience out on that trail. It would turn out the Mleho's trail cuts across a geographic line called the Sai Kung Barrier. This is an area of the Sai Kung Peninsula that is generally considered to be a portal to other dimensions. And there have been enough people to have otherworldly experiences out on this trail that loosely match what Zhang claims to have seen and experienced, that they dubbed the area this trail is in as the Bermuda Triangle of South China. And adding even more intrigue to this area is the fact that several other very experienced hikers have gone missing along this trail, and they've had huge search parties sent out for them, but they were never found. Zhang would eventually share his story of what happened to him out on the trail in a 3,500-word essay that he posted on social media. He, and many others, believe that when he first fell and collapsed on the trail, that he actually fell through the Sai Kung Barrier and entered another dimension. That for those days that he was wandering around having no idea what was happening to him, that he wasn't really in this dimension anymore. He was somewhere else. Zhang believed the only reason he was able to escape this other dimension was because on his final night in this other place, he began to hear the sounds of the rocks and the water whispering to him. He said the only reason he was able to hear that was because he had sort of accepted his fate, that here he was in this totally strange world that he couldn't understand and didn't have any real expectation to escape from. And it was that sort of resignation that he allowed himself to feel that kind of put him in touch with this dimension, and he believes that's what ultimately allowed him to come back home. Despite those who doubt him, Zhang stands by his version of events. While his time on the trail did not cause him any physical harm, to this day he is still haunted by it. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of today's episode in the comments. And remember, we have hundreds of videos for you to binge right now. But if you're looking for a recommendation from me of that one video that's worth your time, well, it's this one right here. So give it a watch. All right, until next time, see ya. Today, I'm going to share 3 stories that each have a very iconic, disturbing photograph that is tethered to that story. And at the end of each of these stories, I'll show you that photo. And some of these photos are truly astounding. But before we get into those stories, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place because that's all we do. So if that's of interest to you, please offer to host the like button at your house for a big dinner party. But when they show up, don't let them inside. Instead, simply tar and feather them. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into today's stories. On the morning of October 21st, 1990, a 30-year-old man named Lee Hunsho and 3 of his friends hiked up Bilu Mountain, which is located in northern Taiwan. Now, by this point, the group had already been hiking for several hours, and so they were quite tired. I mean, Lee's legs absolutely burned, but Lee and the others kept on pushing until they reached the top of this rocky ridge. They all stopped and were able to catch their breath for a minute. So Lee was a bank manager, but he was also a very outdoorsy person, and he'd been wanting to do this hike up Bilu Mountain for a long time because it was sort of like a rite of passage for hikers in Taiwan. It took an average of almost 8 hours to get to the top and back down again, and the terrain could be really rough. As a result, it was considered one of the most challenging hikes in all of Taiwan. But despite that, it was also a major tourist destination that was usually really busy, with lots of people attempting to do this hike. But on this particular day, for whatever reason, the friends had not seen anybody else on this trail. No one. And I mean, the weather was good. It was a weekend. I mean, there was really no good reason for nobody to be here. But they had the mountain to themselves. So Lee and his friends, they stood on this rocky ridge and caught their breath. They had some water. They had a couple of snacks. And then it was onward because they were not at the summit yet. I mean, this was a beautiful lookout point they were at, but they still had some pretty difficult climbing ahead. And so on they went, very excitedly. They're making their way towards the top. This is something they were all really excited about. And eventually they reached this section of the mountain that was sort of famous amongst tourists because it was a really, really steep section where the only way to get up was actually to climb a rope. There was a rope anchored into the mountain where, hikers had to grab the rope and walk and pull themselves up this section. It was like this kind of cool part that made you feel really rugged. And so when the men got to the spot, they all wanted to make sure there was a picture of them navigating this particular terrain. And so one by one, each of the men got on the rope and sort of paused at some point and turned around and made sure to get a cool picture of themselves making this really difficult section of the climb. And then once they had all taken their picture, they actually went the rest of the way up the rope and continued all the way up to the summit. And once they were on the summit, the friends actually didn't spend a whole lot of time there. I mean, remember, it takes almost 8 hours to do this entire round trip. And so you're sort of fighting against the darkness. You want to get back down before the sun goes down. And so they were up there long enough to get a couple of pictures and, again, to take stock of the fact that basically no one is here. In fact, literally, nobody is here but them. It just seems sort of surreal. This is such a beautiful place, such a popular place. Why is nobody here? But didn't matter. They got their pictures, they got their beautiful scenery, they had some more water and snacks, and then they began making their descent. Now, on the way up, the friends had all been together. There was no separation. They were all, one by one, navigating each part of the terrain and making their way up together. But on the return trip, they got pretty separated, in part because Lee was really dragging behind. He was just so tired from the ascent that he sort of told the others, like, hey, go ahead, like you can walk ahead of me. We all know where we're going. We're going down and we'll meet at the car, so just go on ahead. And so Lee's friends had done just that. They had sort of taken off and gotten a bit of a lead on Lee. And so after a couple of hours of the group sort of broken up, making their way down the mountain, the friends in the front, who had left Lee behind effectively, they stopped at a certain point and they realized like they were really huffing it down the mountain, moving really quickly. And they thought, you know what? Lee was really tired up there. Maybe we ought to just sit here and wait for a minute and let him catch up, and then we'll make the final stretch together. And so the friends, they stop. And again, they're sort of looking around thinking how weird it is that nobody else is here but them. Like still, no one's come up the mountain. No one's come down the mountain. It's just them. It's very odd. They're sitting there waiting and they're looking back up the trail, expecting Lee to show up anytime, but he doesn't. And so eventually one of the friends says, you know what, you guys stay here. I'm gonna go back up the mountain a little ways and just see if I can catch Lee and just walk with him back down. I'm sure he's just exhausted and, I'll help him sort of finish up the hike here. And so this one friend, he begins going back up the trail. And for quite a while, he's basically hiking back up the mountain. And the whole time he's expecting he's gonna run into Lee. He has to. I mean, there were other trails that spidered off on the way down, so it was possible to take a wrong turn and sort of accidentally go down the wrong path, but for the most part, it was pretty linear. But as he's going up, he has not found Lee, and after a while, he's been hiking for like an hour back up the mountain and still no Lee. And he thinks, you know what, I can't do this, it's getting dark out. I have to go back and catch up with the other friends and just go down to the car, because at this point, it seems pretty likely that Lee must have gotten turned around and he must have taken one of those other pathways, and now he's probably ahead of me. He's probably down at the car by this point. And so this friend who had done the rescue mission turned around, went back down, linked up with the other friends that were still sitting there waiting for him. Together, they walked all the way down the trail and they got to the car. And when they got there, they're expecting to see Lee, but he wasn't there. And by now, the sun had basically set, and so the friends realized that, okay, like, we have a real problem here. I mean, clearly Lee didn't just get lost. He's still on the mountain somewhere. And like, what are we gonna do? It's about to be nighttime. Like, we can't go up there looking for him. And so they hopped in their car and they drove to the nearest police station to tell them to go look for Lee. And sure enough, there would be this huge search that was launched for Lee. And over the coming week, I mean, there were all these people out scouring the mountain looking for Lee, but they couldn't find him. And after a week of searching, the police had to call it off. And so Lee's friends and family were left with this huge question mark. Like, where did he go? What happened to him? I mean, the not knowing was in some ways worse than having found out he had died or something. And so there's this horrible uncertainty. Nobody really knows how to react to this. Do you grieve his loss now, or do you hold out hope that maybe he's still alive? Well, the friends and family kind of did the latter. They kind of held out hope that, maybe he's out there somewhere. And weeks turned into months, and eventually 4 months went by. And it was at that point that other hikers who were making their way up the mountain, they went off the trail on purpose. They were sort of off the trail for a bit, and they came across Lee's body. Now, the immediate reaction was obviously devastation for Lee's family and friends, but at least it seemed like they were going to get closure about what actually happened to Lee. However, when police began to investigate what actually killed Lee and why, they ran into a lot of anomalies. Number one, they did an autopsy and they couldn't figure out what killed him. There was no clear cause of death. Number two, where he was found, he was just kind of sitting there, with his back against the mountain. His pack was right next to him. It almost seemed like he just sat down and then just died in place. But again, there's no clear cause of death. There was no obvious, trauma he sustained. It certainly didn't seem like he fell. He didn't appear to have any obvious injuries. He just stopped at some point on the mountain and died. And on top of that, remember, Lee is like a seasoned climber. He had supplies in his bag that could at least last him for some time. He had a flashlight, he had a compass. He knew where he needed to go, down the mountain to the car. Why is he stopping? Again, no injuries, no clear injuries. Why is he stopping right there until he dies? It just didn't add up. But then there was another very strange development that sort of took the story in a totally new direction. One of the friends who was with Lee on that doomed hike, the one who had the camera that took pictures of all of them climbing up that rope and took pictures up on the summit, he went and got his pictures developed shortly after Lee had been found dead. And when he went through the photos from their trip, he could not believe what he found. Here is the photo of Lee posing with that rope. And if you notice, at the top of this segment, there's a person clearly up there looking down at Lee and his friends. But remember, they didn't see anybody else on the mountain the entire time they were there. And they certainly did not see that appears to be a young girl in a red jacket, right at the top of the segment they were in when they were taking those photos. They didn't see her. They would have absolutely communicated with her, but they didn't see her. And so they have this photo of this girl in Lee's picture, but she wasn't in any of the other photos. She was just in Lee's. And making this even stranger is there was this myth about this mountain, that there were these spirits on this mountain that would sometimes target hikers and lead them astray away from their friends off the trail, where effectively they would die. And wouldn't you know it, it seemed an awful lot like Lee was led astray and just sort of sat down and died on the mountain shortly after that picture captured this girl in red looking down at him. BetterHelp is the paid partner of today's video. As an adult, I have found the holiday season can sometimes be sort of depressing. And I think the reason for that is nostalgia. I find myself looking back at my childhood when I had no responsibilities and I basically just got given presents and had wonderful food and family and friends around. And I look back at that and I think, that's what the holidays are about. Why can't I have that? Now I have bills to pay and I have a job and I have responsibilities. It doesn't feel magical. It feels stressful and kind of sad. But I'm here to tell you that there's a solution. And it's not to go back in time. It's instead to just be present. Be present in the moment. Appreciate what you have. Things have changed, no doubt, but that's okay. Change is okay. You just can't be stuck in the past. You need to be in the present. So if you want to slow down, reflect, and reset this December, BetterHelp makes it really easy to start talking with a therapist. BetterHelp accepts both HSA and FSA cards, making it even easier to prioritize your mental health. In 2024 alone, over 137,000 people used their HSA or FSA benefits for therapy through BetterHelp. So be sure to use yours before they expire. Click the link in the description or go to betterhelp.com/Mrballen to get 10% off your first month. On the morning of August 8th, 2024, a 48-year-old Russian woman named Lyudmila Lazarenko sat on the floor of a bungalow deep in the Amazon rainforest in Peru. The bungalow was small and mostly just for sleeping, but it was connected to a communal kitchen and dining space. Lyudmila sat right in the middle of the bungalow on the floor with her eyes closed and her legs crossed, and she was trying to meditate, but the sounds of the birds and the insects outside in the rainforest, plus the sound of her friend, Ivan Kuzmin, who was moving around in the attached kitchen, were making it hard for her to concentrate. And so Lyudmila finally gave up on meditating for right now, and she opened her eyes and she looked out towards the kitchen, and she saw her friend, Ivan, who was 38 years old and from Ukraine, and he was busy brewing some tea. So Lyudmila and Ivan genuinely were just platonic friends. In fact, Lyudmila, she was married and had 2 kids, but she was out here alone. She and Ivan were actually part of what was a retreat out in the Amazonian rainforest with other people from all over the world who would come out here to meditate in nature and do some soul searching and hopefully come back to their regular lives with some additional perspective. Now, Lyudmila and Ivan had been going to retreats like this for the better part of 2 years, and that was actually how the two had met each other. And so they were just friends. They had this similar interest in going to retreats like this one. But there was one aspect of these retreats that really is the thing that drew Lyudmila and Ivan out to the rainforest. It was not just to sit in nature and just hope for the best. They would go to these ayahuasca retreats, where basically they were led through this meditative process where they would drink this very special tea that would sort of affect you in different ways. And, some people believed it sort of led you on this spiritual journey where, it's just this very powerful, soul-searching event where you come out of this thing feeling like a different person. If you've had trauma in your life or you have, post-traumatic stress, or maybe you have trauma in your life that you're not even aware of, going through this style of retreat, these ayahuasca retreats, people have said has been very powerful and transformative. And Lyudmila, she lived a pretty typical life back home. She's a very busy mom and a wife, and she found doing these retreats really offered her a big reset. She felt like it was the one chance for her to kind of disconnect from responsibility and just be at peace. And Ivan, for the most part, felt very much the same way. I mean, he came to these retreats for similar reasons for his own life. And so here they are, they're out in the rainforest and, they're brewing up some tea, some ayahuasca tea, and they're in this bungalow and they're getting ready to have this sort of meditative journey, but they were about to break a very important rule. So the man who ran this particular retreat out in this part of the rainforest, he made it explicitly clear to everybody who came out there that no matter how many times you've come to these retreats or similar retreats, you never, ever drink the ayahuasca without a shaman present. Basically, without somebody else there to sort of help guide you through this process. If you were to do it on your own, who knows what could happen? And so everybody knew you cannot do this on your own. But Lyudmila and Ivan, they felt like, you know what, I get it. We're not supposed to do that. We know that. But we've done this so many times and we know what we're doing. So let's just brew up some ayahuasca of our own and we'll stay in our bungalow and we'll drink it ourselves. We'll have our own experience. Nobody will even know. And so that's what Ivan was doing in the kitchen. He was making ayahuasca tea. And when he was done, he grabbed 2 mugs of this tea. He walked back over to Ludmila, who was in the bungalow section. He sat down next to her. They drank their tea, and they both laid down on the ground and closed their eyes. A couple of hours later, the director of this retreat, who at the time was directing some group meditation not very far away from the bungalow where Ivan and Ludmila were, he was doing this group meditation when he heard a loud scream, and it was coming from somewhere near the bungalows. And instinctively, he got up, he abandoned the group he was with, and he ran to the scream. And he saw one of his staff members. She was the one who screamed, and she was standing looking into the bungalow where Ivan and Ludmila were. And so the director rushes over and gets right next to this woman, and he looks into the bungalow, and immediately he knew 2 things. One, he knew for a fact these 2, Ivan and Ludmila, had broken the rule. They had taken ayahuasca without a shaman present. And 2, they had paid a horrible, horrible price. So ayahuasca is not just some herbal tea. It is a very powerful hallucinogen. And that's the whole point. People go out into the rainforest for these retreats and drink this hallucinogen in order to basically have perspective on their lives that you can only get by, introducing this chemical and causing yourself to hallucinate. People talk about almost seeing themselves from the outside looking in and like having this deeply spiritual event where you come out of your trip, that's what it's called, feeling like, oh my goodness, I know myself better now because of the hallucinations I just went through. But critically, the reason you have to have a shaman present in these retreats is really for safety. Because sometimes when you take ayahuasca, you have a bad trip where you have all these hallucinations, but they're of horrible, terrifying things, but you can't differentiate them from reality. And so you're living in a nightmare. And a lot of times these bad trips, it feels like something's gonna happen to you. You're gonna get hurt in some way, or somebody else is gonna get hurt unless you act. But again, you're sort of out of your mind. And so you have these shamans present to protect you from yourself. But Ivan and Ludmila didn't have a shaman present. And so when they entered their trip, Ludmila was having a good trip, Ivan was not. He had a horrible trip. And in his trip, he believed that Ludmila had become possessed by evil spirits, and he needed to save her soul. And how was he gonna save her? Well, he took a metal bottle and beat her savagely, and then he went and got a knife from the communal kitchen and he proceeded to dismember her. That staff member who walked over and screamed, they looked in and saw Ivan looking at them, smiling, totally insane looking, still high on ayahuasca, and there are pieces of Ludmila all over the bungalow. Here is a picture that was taken of Ivan very shortly after that staff member discovered this bloodbath inside of the bungalow. Ivan is literally sitting on the ground, feet away from pieces of Ludmila. He's just murdered her savagely, and he's still absolutely tripping on ayahuasca. He looks like an absolute madman. Ivan would come down from his ayahuasca trip, and when he did, he immediately confessed to what he had done, and he was arrested for murder, and he is currently serving time in prison in Peru. Around 4 p.m. on August 20th, 1975, an 18-year-old boy named Michael McQuilkin hiked up a massive granite rock called Mleho Rock, which is in Sequoia National Park in California. Michael's 12-year-old brother Sean and his 15-year-old sister Mary were also on this hike with him, but currently they were lagging way behind, and he could just tell it was because they were tired. Now, the hike to the summit of Mleho Rock was only a quarter of a mile, like this is a pretty short hike, but it was really steep. And Michael, despite only being 18, was sort of a pretty seasoned climber. I mean, he had just hiked 200 miles through the Sierra Nevada mountain range all by himself. And so for him, this terrain was no big deal, but he knows his siblings are not big mountaineers, nor are they pretending to be. And so he thought, okay, I'll wait, I'll let them catch up. But as Michael waited, he started to notice that the sky was getting pretty dark. Now, he had checked the weather before coming out here, and there was not supposed to be a storm, but it was sort of undeniable that something's happening. This is not normal. It's getting pretty dark and windy. But Michael told himself that, you know what, maybe there's just a little pocket of weather and it'll pass. This can't be a big deal. And then eventually his siblings finally caught up to him, and then together, just a couple of minutes later, they were right at the summit. Now, by the time they were on the summit, they're looking out and the view is spectacular. But now it's becoming increasingly apparent to all three of them that this weather system, whatever's rolling in here, is pretty big and pretty bad. This is not some passing little thing. The sky is like pitch black at this point. But before they left, they just wanted to take a quick picture. And so because they didn't have a tripod or anything, they actually had Mary just take a picture of Michael and Sean. It was the best they were gonna do. They couldn't really get a group shot. And so Mary snaps a photo of the two brothers. And then after taking this photo, they put the camera away and they're about to begin their descent when suddenly, all around them, everything turns bright white and there's this loud cracking sound, and then Michael is thrown to the ground, and before he has any idea what's going on, he's looking over and he sees his brothers on the ground, his sisters on the ground, and in fact, he sees smoke coming off of Sean's back. And that's when he realized they had just been struck by lightning. Now, Michael didn't really know if he was badly hurt or not, but he was able to jump right to his feet and he felt like he was basically okay. And his sister also, she was able to stand up, and they're obviously both disoriented and shocked. But Sean, I mean, he's in a heap on the ground and is literally smoking. It seemed like he really took the brunt of this lightning strike. And so Michael and his sister, they scooped Sean up, and together they hustled down the mountain, they got in a car, and they rushed to the hospital. And somewhat unbelievably, despite taking effectively a near direct hit from a lightning bolt, Sean survived. I mean, he was covered in burns, but he and Michael and Mary all lived through this strike. But the reason we know about this lightning strike is not just because they survived. That's great, but that's not why we still talk about it today. The reason we still talk about it today is because of that picture that Mary took of Michael and Sean standing on the summit of this mountain. If you look at this picture, you can see that the two brothers, their hair is sticking up in all directions. And they noticed at the time that their hair was standing up, but they didn't know why. They thought it was kind of funny. That's why they're smiling in the picture. But what they didn't realize they were capturing in this photo is the very scary phenomenon that occurs when you're basically right about to be struck by lightning. The air around you, especially if you're in a very exposed spot, like the summit of a mountain, gets electrically charged and your hair stands up right before you're hit by the bolt. And so now this picture is now used by the National Park Service to show people what to be aware of when you're out hiking on these mountains. If your hair starts to stand up, you better move. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of today's episode in the comments. And remember, we have hundreds of videos for you to binge right now. But if you're looking for a recommendation from me of that one video that's worth your time, well, it's this one right here. So give it a watch. All right, until next time, see ya. One night in August of 1986, villagers in a tiny rural town in West Africa heard a loud booming sound coming from outside. Most of the villagers thought this sound was thunder, others had no idea what it was, but the noise seemed insignificant. Little did they know, that sound was actually a death sentence. They just didn't know it yet. This story sounds like it was pulled straight out of an apocalypse movie, except it really happened. And the scary part is, it could happen again today. But before we get into that story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place because that's all we do, and we upload once a week. So if that's of interest to you, please offer to make the like button a s'more, but instead of chocolate, use mud. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into today's story. Before sunrise on August 22nd, 1986, a man named Ephraim Che woke up feeling groggy and confused. As he lay in his bed inside of his small mud brick house perched up on a cliff, he tried to remember what happened the night before. He didn't know why, but he knew, something happened last night. I gotta remember it.
But as he lay there kind of jogging his memory, he felt like there were holes in his memory, like he couldn't quite piece together what had happened the day or night before. However, there was one thing he distinctly remembered about the night before, and that was at some point he had heard one really loud boom of thunder outside. And Ephraim, kind of somewhere in the back of his mind, had thought, oh, it's going to rain tonight, and maybe when I wake up it'll still be raining. And then Ephraim, no matter how hard he focused, he couldn't really remember how much time passed after hearing that booming sound and then getting in his bed the night before. But at some point he remembered being in his bed and feeling kind of sick. And that was it. That was his whole memory of the night before. And so that morning, August 22nd, when Ephraim has suddenly woken up feeling confused, he rolled over and he looked out the window right nearby his bed, and he looked outside and he saw the sky was clear and the grass was totally dry. There was no indication that it had rained anytime recently. And so Ephraim is thinking to himself, something is definitely off here, but I just can't get my mind right. And so finally, Ephraim just sits up in his bed, he swings his legs out of his bed onto the ground, he stands up and practically falls over once he's on his feet. But he eventually gets himself back up, kind of steadies himself, and then he thinks, okay, I need to go check on my 4 kids and make sure they're okay. But the second Ephraim began to move in his house, it was like his body didn't obey his mind. Because moments later, instead of checking on his kids, Ephraim had wandered out his front door and was just standing out in front of his house, just kind of staring off into the distance, having no idea why he walked out there. The village where Ephraim lived was called Nyos, and Nyos is extremely rural. There's no electricity, there's no running water, and there's no paved roads for miles. The village is actually split into 2 parts. There's Upper Nyos and Lower Nyos. Ephraim lived in Upper Nyos, right near this big, beautiful lake called Lake Nyos, but the majority of villagers lived in Lower Nyos, which was below the lake. So that morning, after Ephraim kind of found himself standing outside of his hut for no reason, he began looking around in hopes that other people would be out and about in Upper Nyos, where he lived, so he could go talk to them and try to figure out what was wrong with him or, what was going on generally. But as he scanned around Upper Nyos, he saw there was not another soul anywhere. He was it. He was the only person walking around. So, without giving it much thought, Ephraim decided he would just start walking down towards Lower Nyos to try to talk to someone down there. And so he left his hut and he began walking down the hill that would take him to Lower Nyos. After Ephraim got about halfway down this hill, right when he was near Lake Nyos, he stopped because suddenly he became totally aware of the fact that the world was totally silent. Normally, the baboons in the nearby forest would be barking and insects would be humming and birds would be chirping, but now it was just completely, totally silent. Even the mosquitoes that were a totally annoying constant in Ephraim's life were gone. It was like the entire world had just shut down. And as Ephraim is looking around, wondering what is going on here, he hears off to his right, over near the lake, a woman shrieking at the top of her lungs. And so Ephraim whipped his head in the direction the screams were coming from, and he saw there was this woman about 100 feet away. She was a local, and she was looking right at Ephraim, and she was barely dressed, and she was ripping the rest of her clothes off, and she was just screaming. And so, acting on instinct, Ephraim immediately turned and just started running towards this woman. And as he's bounding towards her, getting closer and closer, he's starting to notice there's these strange shapes on the ground kind of near this woman. But as he was staring at them, he just couldn't quite place what they were. But when he got about 20 feet away from this shrieking woman, he stopped again because he realized the shapes on the ground were this woman's entire family. They were all just laying on the ground as if they were sleeping. And near them was all of their cattle, also just laying on the ground as if they were sleeping. But as Ephraim stared at each of these people and each of these animals on the ground, he saw there was some blood around their noses and their mouths, and he realized no person who's sleeping would be that still. These people are all dead. These animals are all dead. And so standing there, Ephraim turned his attention from the bodies back to this woman who had dropped to her knees, and she was grabbing her father's arm and yanking on it and screaming for him to please wake up. But Ephraim could tell there was nothing she could do. Everyone was gone. And Ephraim knew somewhere deep down that, he's supposed to go over and help this woman or console her. but suddenly this wave of fear came over him. The combination of having no idea what's going on, his mind really wasn't working still, and now seeing all these dead people, it was like he just couldn't handle it. And so even though he felt terrible about this, Ephraim took one last look at this very distraught woman and her deceased family, and he turned and he ran away. And when he got back to the main trail, he continued downhill in the direction of Lower Nyos. Like all of you, I spend virtually all of my time daydreaming about climbing onto the back of a wild stallion and galloping down a deserted highway into an abandoned city full of zombies that I need to fight off using my wide array of strange DIY weaponry. Well, dream no more, because today we can kill zombies for real, digitally, with Doomsday: Last Survivors. And before I show you this gem of a game, I have a surprise for you. Thanks to Doomsday, not only can you now slaughter zombies with me, but also you can win $10,000 in cash prizes. Click the link in the description below and download the game, and you could potentially win some of that money. In Doomsday, which is a zombie survival strategy mobile game, you can choose whatever shelters you want and then go out and recruit the strongest heroes, like Catherine with her amazing spinning chainsaw, and they can lead your squad and defend your base from the endless waves of zombies. Another awesome thing about this game is you can march freely and change your route at any time to attack the enemy strategically. Also, you can join an alliance to explore the world with other zombie hunters. Heck, you might even run into me and Lungy's alliance, and maybe we'll let you join. So again, Doomsday, which lets you finally kill zombies for real, digitally, is offering $10,000 in cash prizes. To potentially win some of that money, click the link in the description below and download the game, and you will see there is a might ranking, and the top 5 in that ranking will each walk away with $1,000 each. Outside of that might ranking, many other players will be chosen for cash prizes, some up to $500 each. Hurry and download Doomsday right now so you can join the limited time events to get the legendary hero Jaden and a $250 gift pack for free. The next zombie wave will arrive in 8 hours, so join me and old Lungy now. The villagers in Lower Nyos lived in these tiny huts with tin roofs that were closely grouped together, and usually, even early in the morning, Lower Nyos was a very happy and lively place with kids running around and animals walking in the road and music playing. But as Ephraim came down the hill and was within earshot of Lower Nyos, it was deadly silent. And so with panic starting to rise inside of Ephraim, he began to run at full speed, hoping that when he turned the corner and looked down the main road of Lower Nyos, he would see the people he was hoping he would see. But when he turned the corner and looked down Main Street, all he saw were dead animals everywhere. They completely covered the streets, the sidewalk, everything. And so at this point, Ephraim was so desperate to see another person that he kept his eyes looking straight ahead so as not to look at all the dead animals, and just ran straight into Lower Nyos, and he turned towards the first hut he saw, and he ripped the door open and he stepped inside, and as soon as he did, he just stopped. Because on the ground right in front of him was a woman who was very clearly deceased, just laying in the middle of the floor. She had a bowl of corn right near her hand as if she had been eating and then just fell dead. And so Ephraim, he's staring at this dead woman, and then he looks up and he realizes the bedroom is right in eyesight, and he can see her family in their beds. And at first, Ephraim thought, oh, they're sleeping. But then, as he continued to stare through the doorway into this room, he saw none of them were moving. Their chests were not going up and down from breathing. Her whole family, they were dead too. At this, Ephraim kind of stumbled backwards out of the hut, and then he turned around to face the road he had just been on with all the animals. And when he saw the road again, it was like a piece of his brain started working properly again, because he realized those weren't animal bodies. All those bodies he saw when he came in, those were people. Yes, there were some animals, but most of them were people. He could see people slumped on top of each other, kind of piled up in doorways. He saw one person who was on his motorcycle in the middle of the road, just slumped over his handlebars. And many of the bodies were either naked or partially clothed, with piles of clothing next to them, as if they had been trying to rip their clothes off as fast as they could, like the woman up at the lake had been doing. And as Ephraim looked around in horror, he also realized that there were no markings or cuts or wounds on any of these people. It was like they were just going about their lives when suddenly they died. And so without anything else to do, Ephraim just continued to walk in the direction he had come into the village, hoping that if he kept on going, he might run into someone who was alive. And so he begins walking down the road, he's stepping over bodies, he has no idea what to make of this, and then way down the road, up ahead, he sees there are two people coming towards him. There's a man and what looks like his son, and they're jogging down the road, stumbling over bodies, running towards Ephraim. And so Ephraim stops, expecting these people are going to stop and talk to him. But as these two people got closer, Ephraim saw both of them, the father and the son, their eyes were wide and they were looking straight ahead with kind of a distant 1,000-yard stare. And they didn't stop for a second for Ephraim. It was like they didn't even see him. They just kept on running down the road, past all the bodies. Ephraim didn't try to stop them. He just watched as they passed. And then at some point they veered off the road and ran into the forest and disappeared. And it was at this moment that another part of Ephraim's brain seemed to kind of fit into place. Because as he watched this father and son disappear, he suddenly had this memory come flooding back into his mind. And it was a memory of when he was a kid and his grandfather told him a story. And the story was about Nyos villagers a long, long time ago who decided they wanted to cross Lake Nyos from one side to the other. And so their leader magically parted the waters of Lake Nyos, creating a walkway on the lake bed from one side to the other, and the villagers began to walk. And then about halfway across, a mosquito landed on the leader's shoulder, and when he went to slap the mosquito, he lost control of the waters and they came crashing down and drowned all of them. Ephraim's grandfather told Ephraim that the ghosts of these drowned villagers now resided between these two big rocks located near Lower Nyos. And so growing up, Ephraim, along with many other people in this village, believed that because of these ghosts, Lower Nyos must be haunted. And in fact, that was actually why Ephraim built his house in Upper Nyos, to avoid these ghosts. And so now, as this memory of hearing this story from his grandfather has come flooding back to Ephraim, he thinks to himself, of course, all of this is the work of those ghosts. And so fearing he would be attacked next, Ephraim turned and just continued running down the road, dodging bodies as he went. And as he ran along, periodically he would stop at various tin huts and he would fling the door open in hopes he would find some survivors. But each time he went inside, everybody in there would be dead, lying in their beds or sitting in chairs or lying on the ground. But after running for quite a while, Ephraim turned to go into yet another hut, and right as he reached for the door opened on its own. And standing in front of him was the owner of this hut. His name was Joseph Naquain, and he was in much worse shape than Ephraim. The night before, Joseph had been inside of his hut when suddenly outside he heard that very loud booming sound that sounded like thunder to Ephraim. And then after hearing the sound, Joseph heard his daughter in her bed making this terrible snoring sound. And so instinctively, Joseph turned to walk over to his daughter to make sure she was okay, but he only got a few steps before he collapsed to the ground. He had woken up that morning with cuts all over his arms from where he fell, and he was also totally exhausted and very confused like Ephraim, and so he managed to drag himself over to his daughter's bed, and he pulled himself up onto her bed, and when he got up there, he realized his daughter was deceased. And so now Joseph has opened the door, and he's looking out, and there's all these dead people everywhere, and Ephraim is looking back at him, and Joseph just can't process anything. He's just standing there in a total daze, and Ephraim, he wanted to say something, but no words could come out, and so he too just stood there looking at Joseph. And the two men just stood there right on the threshold of this hut, staring at each other, saying nothing for several minutes, until finally they both just extended their hands and shook silently, and then Ephraim turned around and ran back into the road. And so Joseph at first followed Ephraim kind of out of instinct, but very quickly he veered off from Ephraim, and Joseph went into his neighbor's hut to see if they were okay. But when he opened the door and went inside, he saw all of his neighbors were deceased. But Joseph, he barely reacted to this. It was like he was so numb to what was going on, he just couldn't process it. But after seeing all of his neighbors dead, somewhere deep down inside of his consciousness, Joseph knew he had to go find help. That was his mission. And so he left his neighbor's hut, he ran back to his own hut, he climbed onto his motorcycle, and he started to drive. It took Joseph a long time to drive to the next closest village, but when he got there, there were people and they were all alive. And so Joseph tried to tell them what had happened in his village, but Joseph just had such a hard time putting his thoughts together that his sentences just didn't make sense. He was kind of incoherent. And then when he did make sense, the things he was talking about, an entire village just suddenly dying, sounded crazy. And so nobody at this other village took Joseph seriously, and so that day, nobody from this other village went to Nyos to see what was going on. But the next day, people from this other village did go to Nyos, and when they got there, it was exactly as Joseph had said. The whole village was dead. And as authorities would soon find out, it was not just Nyos that was affected by this tragic event. Several villages not far from Nyos had also suffered mass casualty events on the morning of August 22nd, 1986. And soon, news of these strange mass death events in West Africa were making the news all over the world. And so on August 25th, 3 days after this terrible event, an American scientist named Joseph Devine turned on his TV and saw the news coming out of West Africa. The newscasters were totally baffled about how this could have happened, and no one can figure out what killed these people. And Devine is just staring at his TV in shock, and then he turns, runs to his phone, and he calls his contact at the US government and told them, "You gotta send me to Nyos." And because his contact knew Devine's background, he immediately said, "Yes, I'll get you on a flight as soon as we can." Devine and his scientific partner, Haraldur Sigurdsson, arrived in Nyos 2 days later on August 27th. When they got there, they saw the military was burying the dead in these huge mass graves, and looking on were the few survivors of this event, like Joseph and Ephraim, along with Ephraim's family. They also survived, as well as other villagers who had come to see what happened. And so as Devine and Sigurdsson kind of maneuver their way through this crowd of very solemn people, they heard them talking about what they thought happened to all these people. And the theories ranged from secret governmental experiments to invisible super weapons to even atomic explosions. Others, like Ephraim, believed this was paranormal, that those ghosts from the drowned villagers had attacked the village. But Devine and Sigurdsson were reasonably sure that none of those theories were correct. They felt like they did know what actually happened because they had actually witnessed a tragedy like this before, but on a much smaller scale. 2 years earlier, and 60 miles south of Nyos, in an area called Lake Nyos, 37 people suddenly dropped dead. And Devine and Sigurdsson had been sent out there to try to figure out what happened to these people. And after lots of experimentation, they came up with a theory that explained what happened. And they called it unknown unnatural hazard. They tried to warn people in the area that this could happen again. And in fact, Sigurdsson had written an entire scientific paper about this theory and submitted it to a prestigious science journal. But nobody took Devine or Sigurdsson seriously. What they were proposing sounded made up. It sounded preposterous. But now, in Nyos, it looked very much like their unknown, unnatural hazard had happened again. Devine and Sigurdsson would leave the group of people watching this mass burying take place, and they would make their way up the hill to Lake Nyos, where they would immediately get to work taking water samples from deep inside the lake. And after capping these samples, the lids began popping off. And that was the moment that Devine and Sigurdsson knew their unknown, unnatural hazard theory had to be correct. Lake Nyos is not your typical lake. It is a crater lake, which means it sits inside of a volcanic crater, which is a big, deep, bowl-like pit that was formed from a past volcanic explosion. And because of this volcanic activity, there is carbon dioxide in Lake Nyos. A lot of carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide, or CO2 for short, is an odorless, invisible gas that we actually breathe out when we exhale. Now, if you inhale a little bit of CO2, that won't hurt you. If you inhale a little bit more, like a medium amount of CO2, you could feel dizzy and nauseous. Your skin will start to feel like it's on fire. You'll have rapid breathing. It'll be horrible, but you'll most likely survive if you stop breathing CO2. And if you breathe in a ton of CO2, you're dead. The CO2 in Lake Nyos had been trapped at the bottom of the lake for as long as anyone knew. But on the night of August 21st, 1986, something happened that caused that trapped gas to be released. Now remember, on that night, August 21st, Ephraim recalled hearing what he thought was thunder outside, and also Joseph would recall hearing a loud booming sound that night. Now, we don't know exactly what that sound was, but it's safe to say that that noise, whatever it was connected to releasing the gas. Maybe it was the sound of a rock slide and big rocks plummeted into the lake and hit the lake bottom and freed the gas that way. Or maybe it was just an actual volcanic eruption inside of the lake. Whatever it was, when the CO2 was freed, it bubbled to the top like it bubbled and popped off the lids of their sample tubes. And when it reached the top of the water, it kind of formed a cloud above the lake. Now, we can't see the cloud, but you can imagine a big cloud, and then this toxic CO2 cloud kind of rolled its way down the hill towards Lower Nyos and other villages in the area. And when this big toxic cloud began coming in contact with people, with animals, and insects, virtually all of them died. As for the few who survived, like Ephraim and his family and Joseph, they were left feeling horribly confused, disoriented, nauseous, totally dizzy from CO2 poisoning. But when they finally were able to get away from Nyos and breathe fresh air, the effects of CO2 poisoning wore off and they were okay. This deadly CO2 phenomenon was exactly what happened on a much smaller scale 2 years earlier at Lake Nyos. It was the unknown, unnatural hazard that Devine and Sigurdsson had tried to warn people about. The official death toll of the Lake Nyos disaster was more than 1,700 people and more than 3,500 livestock, although exact numbers will likely never be known. Today, people have moved back into Upper and Lower Nyos, including Ephraim, despite the fact that authorities have said that lake is still very dangerous and another unknown unnatural hazard, aka a CO2 disaster, could absolutely happen again. So that's going to do it. If you got something out of this episode and you haven't done this already, please offer to make the like button a s'more, but instead of using chocolate, use mud. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. We have a podcast called the Mrballen Podcast that puts out brand new podcast exclusive stories on Monday mornings, and on Thursday mornings, we upload remastered versions of our best YouTube videos. Again, it's just called the Mrballen Podcast, and it's available exclusively on Amazon Music. Consider donating to our charity. It's called the Mrballen Foundation, and it provides support to victims of violent crime as well as their families. Monthly donors to the Mrballen Foundation Honor Them Society will receive free gifts and exclusive invites to special live events. Go to mrballen.foundation and click on Get Involved to join the Honor Them Society today. We have 2 additional YouTube channels, Mrballen Shorts and Mrballen en Español. We post near daily content on TikTok, Facebook, and Snapchat. All of those pages are just called Mrballen. If you want to get in touch with me, please follow me on any major social media platform and then send me a direct message. My username is just @Mrballen, and I really do read the majority of my DMs. Check out our merch at shopmrballen.com, and if you have a story suggestion, please submit it to our subreddit just called Mrballen. It's linked in the description below. So whether I see you on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, Reddit, YouTube, Facebook, other YouTube channels, the podcast, Today's video is primarily geared towards skeptics because the story I'm going to tell you today is often cited as proof that we are not alone in this universe, that aliens exist. So, take a listen to the story, and at the end, let me know if you agree or disagree in the comments, and I will respond to as many people as I can. But before we get into that story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place because that's all we do, and we upload once a week. So, if that's of interest to you, please invite the like button to come out for a fun night on the town with you, but don't show up and don't answer any of their phone calls or text messages all night. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into today's story. On the afternoon of June 6th, 1980, a 56-year-old man named Zygmunt Adamski, who just went by Ziggy, was having a late lunch with his wife and his cousin inside of Ziggy's little brick house in the English village of Tingley. That day had been a particularly stressful day for Ziggy and his family because the following day was Ziggy's goddaughter's wedding, and Ziggy was very close with his goddaughter. Ziggy and his wife couldn't have kids because of medical issues, and so his goddaughter had basically become, at least in Ziggy's mind, like his own daughter. And so in fact, at her wedding, Ziggy was going to be walking her down the aisle. And while Ziggy was really excited about this, he was also very stressed out that he was going to screw it up. And so he had gone over and over, what responsibilities he had as part of the wedding party. And he had this little speech he had to give that he had rehearsed 50 times. He had it written out. I mean, he was ready, but he was very much in his own head about something potentially going wrong that he would be responsible for. And on top of that stress, Ziggy had gotten into a fight that day with his cousin because he felt like the cousin was being kind of disrespectful in some way to his goddaughter. And so Ziggy had stepped up and defended his goddaughter to his cousin. And so there was this undercurrent of tension at the lunch table, not to mention this overarching stress that Ziggy was under about this wedding. And so as Ziggy and his cousin and his wife have this kind of tense meal, Ziggy suddenly realizes that he forgot to get potatoes when he went to the store earlier to buy ingredients for this meal. And for some reason, Ziggy decides, you know what, I'm going to just put my stuff down now, go to the store, and get those potatoes, even though at this point it was too late to make the potatoes for the meal. And so maybe Ziggy just wanted to go out and do anything to get away from his cousin for a minute and away from all this wedding planning they were doing and just kind of go out and clear his head. And so Ziggy put his napkin down on the table, he stood up, he told his cousin and wife that he was going out to get potatoes. They were like, okay, and the cousin actually said, do you want me to come with you? Is there anything else you need to get while you're out? And Ziggy said, nope, I'm good. He grabbed some cash out of his wallet and he headed out the door. The village of Tingley, where Ziggy and his wife lived, was a very safe place. He and his wife had actually moved there after fleeing from Poland during World War II, where both Ziggy and his wife, whose name was Lottie, had been held prisoner at some point. And so after all this trauma of being held prisoner and having to flee their home country, they had looked for the safest, best place to kind of resettle and stay for good, and Tingley was it, and they loved it. Ziggy had gotten a job in Tingley as a coal miner, and he had been doing that for 27 years. As for Lottie, she didn't work because she had a disease called multiple sclerosis, which meant she was confined to a wheelchair. But Ziggy and Lottie had quickly made lots of friends in town who were very supportive, and so it wasn't long before Ziggy and Lottie had a very happy and stable life in this town. The little shop where Ziggy was going to was only about 3 blocks away from his house, which meant walking to the store, getting potatoes, and coming back would only take a few minutes. And so Lottie and the cousin back home, they expected to see Ziggy really come back within 10-15 minutes. But when he didn't, and after about 30 minutes went by, Lottie actually got really concerned because Ziggy was just not the type of person to do stuff unannounced. He was incredibly methodical, he was very punctual and reliable, and so being late from this little trip to the store was just so uncharacteristic that Lottie told the cousin, hey, you go to the store and see if Ziggy is there, see what's going on here. Ziggy had worked in the coal mine for nearly 30 years, and he had some serious lung issues from breathing in all of the coal, and so Lottie was thinking, maybe he collapsed or something along the way. away from these breathing issues. But when the cousin got to the shop owner told the cousin that they had seen Ziggy. He had come in about 25 minutes earlier, he had bought a bag of potatoes, seemed totally normal, everything was fine, and he had left, walking back in the direction of his home. And so the cousin thanked the shopkeeper and then left and began jogging back towards Ziggy's house, thinking, maybe he had just not seen him on the way, that maybe Ziggy was sitting down somewhere on this 3-block path. But the cousin got all the way home and didn't see any sign of Ziggy. And so after going back inside of the house, the cousin and Lottie talked about what they should do, and they actually went back out into the neighborhood asking around, asking neighbors and other people if they had seen Ziggy. But after a couple of hours of canvassing the neighborhood and not finding Ziggy or finding any indication of what happened to him, Lottie ended up calling the police. But the police were not inclined to launch a huge investigation for a grown man who's only been missing for a couple of hours in his neighborhood with no sign of foul play or any other sign that anything really bad had happened. And after the police began asking questions of Lottie and the neighbors about what Ziggy's life was like, they learned that recently Ziggy had been declined for an early retirement from the coal mine. Because of those breathing issues he was having, he had requested to retire now, but they said no. And so Ziggy was really upset about that. He was really stressed about this wedding of his goddaughter the next day. He had been fighting with his cousin. Also, Ziggy was basically taking care of his wife, who's in this wheelchair all the time. And so because of all these stressors in Ziggy's life, the police started to wonder if maybe it was possible that Ziggy had not been going to get potatoes, but in fact was just kind of abandoning his family. And so ultimately, on the day that Ziggy went missing, the police told Lottie and Ziggy's cousin that they should just sit tight, see if he comes back tonight, and if he doesn't, go to the wedding tomorrow, because Ziggy is so close with the goddaughter. If he's having some sort of issue right now, he's very likely to come back for something as significant as this wedding. And so Lottie and Ziggy's cousin stayed at the house all night. Ziggy did not come back. They didn't hear from him. And the next day they went to the wedding, but Ziggy didn't show up for that either, even though he's supposed to walk his goddaughter down the aisle. And so after coming back from this wedding, Lottie called the police, she called local hospitals, she talked to all of her neighbors. I mean, she really put out like an all-points bulletin to everybody in the area that something terrible has happened to Ziggy and we need to find him. But despite police beginning to lean into this and her neighbors really going out in force to try to find Ziggy, no one could find him. He had just vanished. Thank you to BetterHelp for sponsoring today's video. Back in 2017, when I left the military, I really struggled to reintegrate back into society. But ironically, I didn't know I was struggling. I just assumed that the random bouts of anger and frustration and general dysphoria that I was feeling all the time were totally normal, and everybody else was dealing with these things too. It wasn't until my family came to me and said, "John, we're really worried about you," that I finally kind of looked inward and realized there was an issue, and so I went out and got help. I got a therapist, and honestly, it changed my life. And now, today, in 2023, even though I would consider myself to be very well adjusted and happy, I still see a therapist, because maintaining your mental health is just as important as maintaining your physical health. So if you are struggling right now, you're kind of caught in your own head, and you're open to therapy, consider giving BetterHelp a try. BetterHelp is a highly reviewed online therapy platform, which means you can get the help you need right from the comfort of your own home. Get matched with a BetterHelp therapist after filling out a brief survey, and then it's up to you how you communicate, whether that's through text or chat or a phone call or video call or some combination. And if at any time you want to change your therapist, it's free and easy to do so. Go to our sponsor, betterhelp.com/Mrballen, for 10% off your first month of therapy with BetterHelp, and get matched with a therapist who will listen and help. On the morning of June 11th, so 5 days after Ziggy went to get potatoes and then vanished, a man named Trevor Parker got to work at his father's coal yard in the English town of Todmorden. The coal yard was basically just this big open lot that had a chain link fence around it that butted up against some railroad tracks. And inside of this lot were just these huge mounds of coal up against the perimeter of the lot. And then also inside of the coal yard was one small office building. And so on this morning, when Trevor pulled through the gates of this coal yard, first of all, he could see the entire yard the second he went in. And as he looked out, all he noticed was the fact that everything was wet from an early morning storm. And so after just kind of surveying around the lot to make sure none of the coal got blown around from the storm, he made his way to the small office building to do some paperwork. Trevor would work inside of that office building for a while, and then around lunchtime, Trevor decided to just go and get some lunch and kind of have a nice long lunch break. And so he left, he went to the pub, he was there for a couple of hours, and then around 3:45 p.m., he came back to the coal yard, and when he went through the gates, everything looked the same, except there was this dark thing on top of one of the coal piles in the back of the yard. Now, Trevor didn't know if he had seen it when he had first arrived that morning or if it was new, but whatever it was on this pile, it immediately caught Trevor's attention. And so after parking his vehicle, Trevor began walking over to this 12-foot tall coal pile with this thing on it, and when he got about 30 feet away from it, he realized he saw someone's shoe, that this dark figure was a person, and right away Trevor started rolling his eyes because there was a group of homeless people that lived near the railroad tracks just outside of the coal yard, and it wasn't uncommon for them to get really drunk and then wander their way into the coal yard where sometimes they would fall asleep. And so Trevor's thinking, okay, clearly one of these drunk homeless people has found their way into the coal yard and they've passed out on top of this pile of coal. And so instead of going over and talking to this person directly, Trevor just turned around, went back inside of the office building, and he called for an ambulance. The ambulance arrived a few minutes later. They did not have their sirens on. They didn't come flying into the yard. This was a routine thing they were doing. They were scooping up a drunk and bringing them back to the hospital. And so when the medics got out of their ambulance and Trevor directed them over to the proper coal pile, they were just cracking jokes along the way. This was not a big deal. When the two medics got to the bottom of the coal pile, one of them began climbing up the coal to go see this drunk person and get them down. And so Trevor, as this is happening, he walked a little bit closer, and when he did, he realized that the person who had fallen asleep on the coal, they had really nice pants on, like tailored pants. They were certainly not what Trevor expected this person to be wearing. But before Trevor could even really react to the clothes this person had on, the medic who had climbed up had finally reached this person. They reached down and began trying to move the person around. And suddenly, when they had manipulated this person's body enough, the medic's facial expression completely changed. They went from somewhat routine to totally horrified, and they backed off of this person on the coals. They turned around and ran down the coal, practically falling over themselves. And when they got down there, Trevor heard the medic say to his partner, call the police right now. And Trevor said, what's going on? What did you see? And the medic who had reacted that way just shook his head and walked away to kind of compose himself. And so Trevor at this point was starting to get spooked himself. Clearly, whatever the medic had just seen had really shaken him up. And so Trevor just kind of stood there while the other medic ran in and called police. And then a few minutes later, a police car came flying into the coal yard, and an officer named Alan Godfrey, along with his partner, got out of the car. And right away, the medic who had gone to the top of the pile and been freaked out by what he saw walked over with a very ashen face, and he told Alan Godfrey that something was terribly wrong with the person on top of this pile. And so Alan, not really sure what to expect, walked over with his partner to this coal pile, and with the medics and Trevor standing back, Alan, on his own, climbed up the coal and he looked down at this person. And what Alan saw was a man lying on his stomach wearing a beautiful three-piece brown suit. And Alan immediately noticed that there was absolutely no soot from the coal that this guy was laying on his suit, even though Alan, just to get up here, had basically covered himself in black soot. And so he was wondering, how did this guy get up here and not get covered in soot? It didn't make any sense. Also, Alan noticed that this guy's hair looked totally bizarre. It looked like someone had given him like a really bad haircut with dull scissors, like they just grabbed tufts of his hair and kind of chopped randomly. I mean, his hair was kind of all over the place. There were bald spots. And then as Alan looked from this guy's hair down, he noticed almost hidden in his hairline was this fairly deep wound in the back of his neck that was still bleeding. but there was this weird green jelly-like substance very obviously placed over this wound, and Alan had no idea what this substance was. But as weird as all that was, that didn't explain why the first medic had basically completely panicked and run away. When Alan tried to roll this guy over onto his back to try to wake him up and see if he was okay, he rolled him over, and Alan got a look at this guy's face. And immediately Alan let go of him and kind of had to step back for a second, because the guy's face was contorted in this frozen look of absolute terror. His jaw was open so wide, it was almost like his lower jaw was dislocated, and his teeth were baring, and his eyes were bulging out of his head. And so Alan quickly realized that obviously this was not just some drunk homeless person who passed out here. This was a dead person, and whatever happened to them must have been unbelievably terrifying to leave someone looking like that in their death pose. It would turn out this deceased man in the coal yard was Ziggy Adamski. But this did not solve the mystery of what happened to Ziggy 5 days earlier. In fact, his discovery really only created more questions. This town where this coal yard was, Todmorden, was located 25 miles away from where Ziggy lived. And as far as anyone knew, Ziggy didn't know anybody in Todmorden, so there was no reason for him to be there. And number two, when he had left to go get potatoes, he had been on foot. So did he walk 25 miles to this random town? Also, assuming he did just walk to this coal yard, this coal yard is a big, wide open lot that if you were standing anywhere near it, even outside the fence, you could look in and basically see the entire place. So it just seemed really unlikely that Ziggy could just walk into this very public open space and get to the top of one of these coal piles without somebody noticing him, whether that was Trevor or one of the other employees that were there, or one of the truck drivers that were in and out of there all the time, all day, doing deliveries, or the homeless people who were near the railroad tracks, or the people who rode the trains that passed by there every single day. I mean, there are a lot of eyes on this coal yard, but nobody saw Ziggy. It was like he just kind of appeared at the top of this pile. And again, even if Ziggy had managed to slip in and sneak to the top of this pile, why didn't he have soot from the coal all over his clothes? And if maybe he had been brought there, if someone had killed him and put him on this coal pile, there's even more reason he would have soot all over him, because they would have had to drag him up to the top of the pile. And even putting all that aside, if someone really did kill Ziggy and they placed him on this pile, why? This is a very open public place. Someone is going to find him. You're going to get caught if you're the killer. And then of course there is the issue of what Ziggy was wearing. That brown three-piece suit he was wearing that had no soot on it, it wasn't his, and it wasn't put on right. The buttons were not lined up. It almost looked like somebody else who didn't know how to put a suit on had tried to dress Ziggy. And then Ziggy also did not have an undershirt on. It was just the jacket over his skin. And then also Ziggy had this totally bizarre haircut that looked like someone who didn't know how to give a haircut had cut his hair with scissors and said, good enough. And then of course you have this wound on the back of Ziggy's neck. Now, the wound itself was determined not to be fatal. It was a fairly deep cut, but it wouldn't have killed him. However, the most significant part of that wound was that green jelly that had been placed across the back of it. During Ziggy's autopsy, they were unable to figure out what this green jelly was, and they ran dozens and dozens of tests on it. And also, during the autopsy, the coroner would determine that Ziggy had actually died the same day he had been found. So he was doing something for 5 days between going missing and being on this coal pile, but nobody knows what it was. And as for his cause of death, the coroner was not entirely sure, but it did seem like he died of a heart attack. The coroner would search all of Ziggy's body for signs of some sort of fight he might have gotten into, some sort of defensive wound on his body, but there was nothing. However, the coroner did find there were very small burns on the back of his neck that were caused by acid, but it was unclear how those got there. When they inspected Ziggy's stomach, they determined that he had been eating and drinking regularly, and so he was not malnourished, he was not dehydrated. He was relatively healthy when he died. He just had this heart attack for unknown reasons, and apparently whatever gave him the heart attack scared him so badly, his face contorted in that horrible way. Ultimately, the coroner just kind of gave up and ruled that Ziggy had died of natural causes, and then the case was closed. But to this day, no one really has any idea how Ziggy went from going out to get groceries to winding up 25 miles away, dressed differently, with this haircut, with this jelly on him and acid burns, dead with this horrible look on his face on this coal pile. It doesn't make any sense. This case has become very famous because people say it is the best example of alien abduction. That Ziggy had left his house to get groceries, got abducted by aliens, and then over 5 days, these aliens did stuff to Ziggy, including cutting into his neck and dropping acid on him, and then they put that green stuff on the back of his neck. They dressed him the way they thought people dressed, in the suit, but they didn't really do it right, and then they literally just dropped him on top of this coal pile, which would explain why he didn't have soot all over him. He was dead, they dropped him, and he just landed on the top of the coal pile. And even if you think that's totally far-fetched, keep in mind, still today, we do not know what that green jelly compound was on the back of his neck. It's literally never been identified, and people have been trying to figure it out for 40 plus years. Also, it's worth noting that one of the responding police officers, Alan Godfrey, claimed to have seen a UFO within weeks of finding Ziggy Adamski. So that's going to do it. If you got something out of today's episode, be sure to check out our podcast called the Mrballen Podcast, where we have literally hundreds more stories just like this one, many of which are only on the podcast. Again, it's called the Mrballen Podcast, and it's available exclusively on Amazon Music.